Yeah.
I'm going to try it. It'll be shorter.
We don't have time.
I was going to put you down at the time.
Not as bad as the
I'll,
drug use discharge though.
and that's something I have a question. Okay, yeah.
So he wants to do that with
Do
Taiwan.
you like practice?
Work those first things, you know.
I don't usually, but I
My
kind
eyes are getting so bad. This huge ring thing I'm just going to. I think they make computer glasses or contact glasses.
All right, well, we have staff and we have a quorum, so I don't think anyone's going to complain if we start a couple seconds early, so. I will call this Transportation Advisory Committee meeting to order for August 17th, 2017. We do have a quorum. No one can leave until we're done voting, just letting you all know. We do have a new member. City of Woodland Park has hired a new Public Works Director, so Ben, if you wanted to say a few words and introduce yourself.
Those of you that don't know me, I've been a civil engineer here in the Springs area for 24 years, with the exception of 4 weeks, City of Woodland Park. Worked as a consultant for the majority of those. The City of Colorado Springs for 7 years. Just happy to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'll start introductions. Brandy Williams, City of Fountain. Jennifer.
Jennifer Irvin, El Paso County.
Ramir Fitzpatrick, El Paso County.
Laura Pellegrino.
Wendy Pettit, CDOT Region 2.
Ken Prather, PPACG.
Rick Orphan, Fort Carson.
Mike Kozak, Cheyenne Mountain Air Force Station.
Darren Horstmeyer, Schriever Air Force Base.
And in the audience, Stacy Shore.
David Evans, business here.
John Hall, CDOT.
Andy Steckline with CDOT.
Staff.
Bethany Sherman, PPACG.
Kevin Reyes, PPACG.
Jennifer Valentine, also PPACG.
Thank you. Do we have any changes to the agenda today?
Move approval of the agenda.
Do we have a second? Anybody want a second? Anybody? Okay. Thank you, Ben. We have a motion and a second to approve the agenda. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Public comments. I don't really see any public, and we know that you guys are all spoken for, so. Approval of the July 20th, 2017 minutes and the July 26th, 2017 minutes. Any changes or comments on those minutes? Do we have a motion to approve?
I did not attend the 26th meeting, so I'm not sure that I should vote on it. So,
Is anybody here at both of them by chance, or any of them?
I was here for none of them.
well, I'll move approval. I mean, assume that, staff reviewed those, and I don't see any. I did watch the videos of the 26th,
Okay.
so.
Okay, we have a motion. Do we have a second?
I'll second it. I wasn't at the second meeting though. Again, based on the fact that staff is.
Okay, we will have
Yes.
In fact, that
full faith in
there's no
staff.
known reason to not agree with them.
Yeah.
More than.
Okay, we now have a motion and a second to approve the minutes for the 20th and the 26th meetings in July. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Board of Directors report. Ken?
Okay, the board did approve at its meeting Mr. Sheets as the new member representing Woodland Park. They approved the tip amendment number 11 that you saw last month. And they had before them the 2045 long-range transportation objectives and targets. Now, TAC made a recommendation for both objectives and targets. CAC only made a recommendation for objectives. The two committees agreed on the objectives. The board approved the objectives, did not approve the targets, and wanted to allow CAC to develop their recommendation. and there were 2 targets that TAC overlooked. And I think Kevin has kept everybody informed, and there was a workshop to address those on Tuesday. So at today's meeting, when we get into targets, we'll have to figure out the right wording to supersede your recommendation of last month. If you want to, you at least have to add 2 new targets, even if you don't change the old targets. They did have a discussion item for the tip delay policy for the projects that have been identified. I don't remember that anybody had any questions at all, so it was a very short discussion. And that was it.
Thank you. Action item 6A, long-range transportation plan scenarios. Jennifer Valentine.
Okay, good afternoon. Jennifer Valentine. I'm a transportation planner with PPACG. So I do have a little presentation for you just to kind of organize everything. So it's been a month or 2 since we talked about scenarios. We've been doing a lot of work in the background. We've had a pretty extensive public outreach process, and we've put everything together, and we're ready to bring them back to you. Can everybody see, or should I dim the lights a little bit?
Just a tad.
Perfect, thank you. So just a real quick overview. So we really view scenario planning as like an insurance policy. Nobody knows exactly what the future is going to look like, but with scenario planning we can come up with a couple of different reasonable, plausible ideas of possible futures, and that way we can make sure that our investments make sense under multiple possible futures, not just a single preferred scenario. So we are planning to use these scenarios in the project scoring and selection process and pretty extensively in the small area forecast, which I'm going to talk about a little bit more later. But just to let you know, we are still following the same methodology that we laid out and that was approved by the board in December of last year. So we're planning to score all potential projects that are submitted under each of the scenarios, however many get approved. So again, I just pulled in a couple of slides from that, the presentation from last December. So this was our slide on scenario development. We're still very much in line with all of this, the multiple plausible scenarios, making good investments, exploring different technological and demographic trends, among others. We actually branched out to a few more. Preparing, not predicting, can't predict the future. And then finally, identifying needs and scoring projects under all the different scenarios. So I like to call this, whose scenarios are these anyway? So like I said, we went through a pretty extensive public process. We did start, you have to have something to start with before you go out to the public. So we started out with 3 underlying land uses. And these were really based on scenario planning, best practices. We looked at what a bunch of other entities have done. I went to a scenario planning conference last year. So it's really a pretty standard set of infill, new centers, and dispersed development. But of course it's tailored to what those things might look like in our region. So we also developed a list of 15 different contributing factors that were based on, hot topics in the news, hot topics for our region in committee conversations, and others. So many of you attended our scenario planning workshop in early June. So that was primarily oriented towards what we're calling stakeholders. So we had TAC members, CAC members, a few people from the board of directors, and then just a few other stakeholders from the region who are kind of in the industry. But then we also wanted to get more of a general public perspective on the role of these contributing factors in the underlying land uses. So we attended 6 different community events. We kind of felt like we were everywhere in June and July, talked to 339 different people, and we combined these 2 sets of feedback to come up with our storylines. Of course, fortunately, there was a lot of overlap between what we heard at the workshop and what we heard at the public events, but there were slightly different perspectives, and we felt like it was really valuable to get both. So just a couple pictures here. These are the pizzas that our workshop participants came up with. We had the underlying land uses as the crusts, and then the note cards or the toppings or the contributing factors. So basically they helped us start developing those storylines. This is a picture of one of our community events on the 4th of July. We did a little bucket exercise where we asked people to put, you can see the little collection of beads here, in buckets. There was one bucket for each underlying land use. And so what we ended up with was buckets full of beads. And I had the exciting task of going through and counting and categorizing all of these beads in the buckets, and I actually developed a spreadsheet to kind of keep track of what people thought was most important in Woodland Park versus people we talked to in Monument versus people we talked to at the El Paso County Fair, and we put all of those together. And so, for example, say this is the dispersed development bucket, and you see a lot of, not really, but you see a lot of dark brown beads. Well, dark brown was water quality and availability issues. So at a glance, you could kind of say, people were really concerned about water issues with dispersed development. So I'm going to assume that you all had a chance to kind of look through your memo and through the PowerPoint in the packet, so I'm not going to spend too much time on these, but so this is what we started with the underlying land uses. Like I said, I'm going to skim through these pretty quickly, so just yell at me if something's not clear. So infill is the first one. Everybody thinks of downtown Colorado Springs, but it's not just downtown Colorado Springs. It's what we've identified as activity centers. So it could be Woodland Park continues to grow, Fountain continues to grow, Monument continues to grow, or specific areas or corridors within Colorado Springs. So the second one is new centers where, those existing activity centers are stable or they might have a little bit more growth, but our new growth is going to occur in new activity centers or nodes. So again, using the map, you have the existing activity centers, and then new growth might be in sort of blobs or corridors. And don't worry about where the blobs are, they're just conceptual.
So Jennifer, they're not location specific? Because I'm curious about that one south.
No, it's just to give you an idea of what it could look like. So if your house is under a blob, don't worry, or, yeah.
Well, there's just not much under that block.
Yeah, and there might be Forest Service land or whatever, so it's just conceptual. Okay, so finally, dispersed development. Again, the existing activity centers remain stable or accommodate a little bit of new growth, but new development is really more dispersed, and I know this is shocking. We have these big blobs of lower density development, and again, don't worry about where they are, just what they look like. Okay, so we had these 4 different categories of contributing factors that we asked the workshop participants and the public to weigh in on. I'm going to skim through these quickly. Things like, are there generational differences about what people want for housing and transportation? What about people who are just moving to Colorado? What are their preferences? Technology, so we looked at things like autonomous vehicles, drones, Lyft and Uber, new transportation and transit technologies. The regulatory environment, so there's a lot of demand for things like tiny houses and these mother-in-law units, accessory dwelling units, but a lot of communities don't allow them. Also, what about parking? How much parking is required and how does that influence our built environment? And then things like where multifamily housing is even allowed. And then the last category was natural environment. So that relationship between how much we drive and our air quality and technology, and then also just water quality and availability. How do you get water to people if our development is really dispersed? How do you handle stormwater and impervious surface issues if we're really condensed? Okay, so now the actual storylines. So before I get to these, I just want to point out the text that the proposed motion refers to is what's in your memo. So the PowerPoint is kind of a condensed version of that, but so the specific wording and the bullet points are what's in your memo. But I'm just going to give you the high points and then we can talk about them. Okay, so the infill storyline. It's really driven by a desire for and acceptance of multifamily housing. Obviously, multifamily housing works a lot better in a sort of more dense environment. Also, both younger generations and seniors. We had a lot of interesting conversations about not just millennials, but, you know, who comes after the millennials and what are their preferences. And seniors looking for sort of lower maintenance options, not having to drive everywhere, having those walk, bike, transit alternatives. We also heard a lot about how well things like autonomous vehicles and then those shared fleets, things like Lyft and Uber and, you know, Zipcar, could work in an infill environment. There were a lot of concerns about parking availability. If everybody is in a dense environment, where are we going to put all of our cars? There was a realization that parking requirements might need to change. You know, real estate becomes really valuable if you're trying to, in more of a downtown environment, and surface parking might not be the best use of that land. So we would probably see lower VMT or vehicle miles traveled, but people were concerned that a higher density development could lead to more concentrated air pollution. So then finally people were concerned about impervious surface concentration and how we treat stormwater runoff if we develop a little bit more dense. So there were a lot of similarities between infill and new centers storyline. Again, people really saw it as driven by kind of the younger generations and certain seniors wanting that type of lifestyle. We talked a lot with people about transit service. And so transit definitely came up in the infill scenario, but it was probably the biggest thing people talked about in new centers. People could see it as important within a center, and so the idea with these new centers is that they're kind of self-contained, so you can live and work and recreate all within a center. But the between centers comes in where, so maybe you have a grocery store in your little activity center, but on Saturday you decide you want to go to Trader Joe's, which is at a different activity center. So you have to think about kind of more regional destinations. I don't know if Trader Joe's is a regional destination, but so then also similar to infill, that same role of autonomous vehicles, the shared fleets, and the ride sourcing. People thought VMT would probably go down if the centers were self-contained, like I was just describing. And then the water concerns were actually kind of straddled on both sides. How do we get water out to new activity centers, and what do we do about stormwater concentration within activity centers? So then the last one is dispersed development. And so this is kind of the opposite of the others with the trends. So continued preference for single-family housing, really a preference for that more rural lifestyle with open space and privacy. And it was sort of split. People could see seniors wanting that low maintenance, more urban lifestyle, or wanting more of that kind of privacy, aging in place, staying out in a more rural or suburban type of area. So this was the first time that telecommuting and drones really emerged as hot topics. So people could definitely see a role for, you know, if you live an hour away from work, but you don't have to drive there every day, then it's maybe not a big deal, or the same with shopping. Also with autonomous vehicles. So they were important here too, but in a different way. So again, that hour commute, if you can sit there and, you know, check email or do your makeup or whatever, it's not as onerous. So a lot of people felt like even if we see higher VMT, that could be offset by higher fuel efficiency and alternative energy. So we didn't hear a lot of people who were concerned about air quality. And people also felt like with more dispersed development, the actual pollution would be more dispersed. And so again, not too much concern about it. Where most of the concern was with water. And that was both with providing water, so in those outlying areas, the infrastructure needed to, you know, actually get water to people. And then if people do have, more people have lawns, outdoor watering, things like that. So my reminder again, the text, we're talking about what's actually in your memo. Before I get to that, really quickly, I do, because it's an additional piece of context setting, and I don't want people to forget that the small area forecast is coming. So how these relate. So small area forecast, so we get population and employment estimates from the state demographer. That's what we use as what we call our control totals. So we know how many people and how many jobs are going to be in our region probably every year through 2045. What we don't know is where. And so we use a model called Urban Sim to spatially allocate those people and jobs, and that helps us determine where our transportation investments need to go. So as you can imagine, if we have an infill scenario, we're going to have people and jobs in certain locations, versus if we have a dispersed development scenario, we're going to have people and jobs in other locations. So without getting into too much of the technical stuff, after we have the conceptual scenarios approved, which is what we're seeking today, or recommended for approval, that's when we actually start building the scenarios in Urban Sim. And so there's a list of tools that I'll actually be using to build these land use scenarios. So we look at things like zoning. So if an area is zoned R5, you can have 5 dwelling units in an acre. Well, maybe if in the future we want to see more development there, we can upzone it to R10. And so that area can accommodate up to 10 dwelling units per acre. And then we let the model decide kind of how real estate prices and everything look. Whether it actually wants to locate 10 units there is to be seen. Other things are, I've been asking everybody for what development projects are in the pipeline, so I can go ahead and put those in so the model doesn't do the wrong thing if something is known. Last two things, so constraints. We don't want to be putting people or jobs in, on military installations that aren't going to accommodate them, or in national forest land or on airport land, for example. And then the last resort is adjustments, where you go in and tell the model, I want 1,000 people in this TAS. And so you're really kind of overriding all of the important statistical models that go into it, but we will have to do that in certain cases where we just can't encourage enough development. We have to force it. So that's what's coming next. But today, really, we're just seeking your input on the 3 storylines that we developed as a result of the workshop and the public outreach. I am going to go ahead and pull up the memo because that's the text that is in question. Yeah. Oh, sorry.
Jennifer.
So, Jennifer, just for some background, because I know that there are some new people here, how different is this from the previous 2040 plan?
Yeah, so I think we've done scenario planning in the past, but it's just being used in a different way, and it's being used in a much more significant way. I think, we always talked about, well, these are ways that our region could develop, but there was always just one official scenario that was related to, air quality compliance and things like that. So at this point, we have a little bit more flexibility since I'm going to get this wrong, but we've been in an attainment area long enough that basically we don't have to have just one scenario. And so from everything we learned about scenario planning, we felt like it made a lot more sense to actually use all 3 of them.
Jennifer, when they'll start with the small area task force?
So we're not having a task force, so that's a little bit different too. So I've been working with all of our member entities individually. Most of you all, except for Ramir, wouldn't have heard from me because I'm talking to land use planning staff, the people who know about those development projects that are in the pipeline. Actually, I talked to you and Sally too. So I'm doing a lot of that legwork in the beginning, and then when we start doing model runs, each of you individually are going to see those drafts because we feel like, well, who knows better what's happening in Woodland Park than you and Sally? You two probably know more about that than Brandy or Tim, for example. And then we also have oversight from, I can't remember if it's 4 or 5 regional economists that have agreed to serve on a small oversight committee in there, kind of as we go along looking at our methodology, and they're going to be looking at our results too.
And so each
Yeah, I mean, we definitely will. We don't want to get to the very end and then bring it in, but we're not having the small area forecast task force this time. So you'll definitely be hearing from us soon about some of the model runs, but it's more of, like I said, working with people individually.
Ken?
Yeah, Jennifer, for history that you're talking about, we used to use a forecasting or disaggregation model called Tellum. And it's a free model. We've been using it for a long time when it wasn't free, and PPACG was one of the pilot entities when Dr. Putman, I think he's from Pennsylvania, started this program. FHWA picked it up and offered it as a free program, but it's a gravity-based model. You got enough density here in employment or people that as you add more stuff in mathematically, this density draws more compared to a lighter density out here. A heavier density over here will draw more out there. Urban Sim is an economic-driven model. So it's a completely different approach. We hope to see how well it does. You know, it used to be the $1 million a year model it took to run it, but the company that has been doing it, and it's been around for many years, you know, is now gone online. It's offered on a very reasonable annual subscription rate. So again, we're one of the people that's piloting it for the first time, and we'll see how well it does from an economic standpoint rather than just a gravity-based standpoint. And for that reason is why we've gotten, you know, 5 of the top economists in the region to look at it for us and provide some of that input from their perspective. But yes, it'll still be coming to the TAC and the CAC to be presented to you as well as to make a final recommendation. And you're right, Jennifer, in the past, as Jennifer explained, we were locked into, because of conformity requirements for carbon monoxide, we had to have one number for all of our emissions. Therefore, we had to have where everybody lived and worked in one place, because every time you move them in or move them further out, we had a different number. But for conformity purposes, legal reasons, we had to have one preferred alternative scenario. So that's why, even though we developed and we looked at 3 of them in the last couple of plans, we wound up using one preferred one. But as we will get into discussion with the TIP, we're coming up to the end of our maintenance period. We will expect to be declared attainment, and we won't be locked into one number anymore. So we can take a look at 3 scenarios and then consider them all equally possible and therefore all equally weighted, rather than having 3 but then ignoring 2 of them.
And so the timeline for this plan is also a little bit different than for previous plans, because before it was, small area forecast was the absolute first thing that was done, because we need to know where all of our people and our jobs are going to be. But this time, since we're going to be building 3 different scenarios in Urban Sim, we had to go through this, you know, workshop and public process to develop these storylines. And so we'll be, like I explained, putting these storylines into Urban Sim. So the small area forecast is happening a little bit later in our plan cycle. Still works, it's just a slightly different approach.
Will you still do a tell-them scenario or no?
If we do, it'll be for curiosity's sake to see how they compare. It might be sort of a post-processing thing after the plan is actually approved. I don't know how much extra time we'll have to do things for curiosity's sake, but it's certainly of interest to us to see how they compare.
Yeah, for those that were involved in the past, that when we used to tell them that after the model ran, there was a lot of interactive post-processing to get what we thought were reasonable results. You could not just take the model at face value. Now, don't know that we might not have the same problem with Urban Sim, but we'll see.
Ready? Tim?
I'm ready, yeah. So the bullet where it says infill scenario would support lower VMT, a denser development pattern could lead to greater concentration of pollutants. It kind of seems to be opposite of what I remember whenever we were doing, the air quality conformity. And also, it seems like, the denser development is also not just BMT, but you're changing your mode share. So you're reducing your number of trips, or the trip types of vehicle trips, I should say. And also, you're decreasing the distance of travel. So I kind of question how that a greater concentration of pollutants, if you're using the same amount of vehicles, maybe, but, there's also a change in travel patterns. And also, you look at the dispersed development, it says vehicle miles traveled are likely to increase under this scenario. Air quality may or may not degrade due to improvements in fuel efficiency and alternative energy. Well, wouldn't that also apply to the shorter trips, type of vehicles also? So to me, it's kind of like, it doesn't seem balanced, or it doesn't seem.
Ken?
Well, I'll let Jennifer respond to, because the bullets that are here are the summary of the comments we got from the scenario workshop and all of the public. So this is kind of that qualitative, subjective perception.
It may not be accurate.
It may not be.
And I agree with you.
And when you get into how much emissions are going to be produced, everybody living in town and driving at slower speeds will produce more emissions than living on the periphery and driving 45 to 55 miles an hour. Because it's speed related if you don't change mode shift. But so you have a combination of speed changes, fuel sources, distance driven, and all of that gets fed into an EPA-approved model called MOVES that then gives you the net balance effect. What emissions are you producing, whether it's carbon monoxide or greenhouse gases or ozone precursors, and that's what we would use to actually evaluate what it is. So yeah, it's a combination of where people live, how fast they drive, what they drive.
Right. So also on the infill from the workshop, at least the discussion on my table was, multifamily was part of it, but also it was more than just as like high density and mixed uses. So, meaning it's not just like apartments or anything like that. It would be high, like patio homes, and it could be, like you mentioned R5. Well, you could do some things where it's a high density in a more units in a smaller space, just these small lot developments, and having mixed commercial, retail, and all that included within, so that you do get that change in this. At least this was a discussion at my table where you do get that change in trip from being auto-oriented to using transit friendly, being more transit friendly or bikeable or walkable. So that gets into that mode share.
So I'm going to propose a couple of changes because I want to capture what you're saying, and I like what you're saying, but when I get done typing, let's talk about them. So it sounds like you're talking about a variety of
High density.
higher density housing options, maybe just including multifamily, since that was specifically one of the things we talked about.
And mixed use. Because it was housing, but also like commercial retail mixed in.
Okay, maybe we'll. So thoughts on, I can make this bigger if anyone's squinting. Where's the, what are we at? See, I'm squinting, I can't even see it. That's better. Okay, a desire for and acceptance of a variety of, that doesn't make sense. Higher density housing options and mixed use development.
Yeah, that's kind of what I heard.
So I am perfectly fine with tweaking the wording. I mean, some of you were at the workshop. I just don't want to change the spirit of what's here because, as Ken mentioned, this is based on the workshop and what we heard from the public. And, I'm not sure about a lot of people talked about this. Pollution is concentrated or it's dispersed, and it does send sort of a weird message to say, well, our pollution is just dispersed if we all spread out. So when you were talking, I got rid of that piece because it doesn't really matter for the scenario. When I'm building it in Urban Sim, it doesn't really matter if the, pollution is blowing away in the wind.
Or if it's concentrated. Yeah.
Right. So I edited it to say an infill scenario would support lower vehicle miles traveled and may lead to mode shifts. Can someone word it better? A variety of...
Yeah, let's see, a change in mode shift, really.
Or change in mode share.
There you go.
Thoughts on that one?
Mhm.
So Jennifer, is there a way that we vote on the 3 areas, but we don't actually say that we agree with every single bullet? Because those are subject to change. I think we can agree with the spirit of them, but like Tim said, we haven't worked out the details yet, so it's hard to specifically state, this one's going up in pollution, this one's going down. That's kind of just the opinion of the group at the time. So I don't necessarily want us to feel like we have to change every bullet to fit what this committee thinks, but is there a way to say, we agree with the 3 scenarios, and staff and the public and Urban Sim will flush out kind of the bullet points underneath?
Yeah, I mean, so we definitely need that direction so we can start building the nod from the committees and the board that we like these ideas conceptually. Agreed. I don't think we need to spend a lot of time wordsmithing, especially because this is really just what we heard from the workshop and from the public. I do think if there are a couple of little things that make people uncomfortable, it's a good idea to just go ahead and tweak it, because we might hear it again from the CAC, we might hear it again from the board. So yeah, in the spirit of time, let's not spend a ton of time wordsmithing, but if there are a couple of other things that people want to bring up, I think we can certainly address them.
Jennifer?
That goes to my question, and thanks, Brandy, because I think my question generally I agree with the scenarios, but how do these bullets really change the model? Because I'm not. So, for example, one of the things I see right here is in the last one, is that the dispersal. Mm-hmm. It says it's more expensive to build out under that. In some cases, it's actually more expensive to build infill because you're having to, fit stuff in a smaller area with less. And so sometimes, we just had a recent development in the county that, had to spend more money. If they would have been in a new area, or what I would call kind of a virgin area, it would have been a lot less expensive, which is why some of the people are actually developing more in unincorporated El Paso County. So, so I don't really agree with some of those statements in there, but I generally agree with the 3 scenarios. I'm uncomfortable saying that I agree with all of the text underneath here. So.
Yeah, and so a little bit more context. So it's envisioned as a very iterative process when we start building the scenarios in Sim, because I'm going to do a first run of the model, and maybe we've put in some developments and constraints and tagged things as scenarios, and it doesn't really look like infill, or it doesn't really look like new centers, and so there's going to be a lot of back and forth with maybe the committees and people individually. What does infill look like for Colorado Springs? I've said all along it's not the same as a Denver or Chicago or something. So that's where we get into the quantitative piece. This is really the qualitative piece of, this is kind of what infill looks like.
So are you telling me that the bullets really don't have an effect on how the models are run for each of the 3 different scenarios?
They're meant to be more descriptive. So we've been talking about contributing factors, and so they help explain how we could get to a specific built environment. So I guess the answer to your question is no or yes, but
Depending.
no. One specific bullet under here doesn't really influence technically what we're going to do in Urban Sim.
Amir?
It's a storyline.
I guess, and I get the storyline aspect of it, and that it doesn't necessarily affect the model, but the bullets may affect the conclusions that we draw from the model and the plan that we develop based off of that, based off of the model. And so I think it would be, back to what Brandy said, and I don't know that we got the answer to, I think her question was a vote to approve the scenarios, does that lock us into those underlying assumptions, or can they be altered or tweaked or corrected in some instances in the future?
I'm not sure how a motion might be worded. I mean, depending on your level of comfort, I suppose you could say something like you approve them in concept.
Yeah, so I see these as descriptive of what it is that of each scenario.
Mm-hmm.
And based on what we heard from our workshops.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, my comments are, this is what I heard as a description, at least from my table, and actually from some of the summaries of what I heard. So I don't know if this affects an input or if you use this as an input into that model, but I see it as a description, and I would want the description to be reflective of what was discussed at the workshops.
Mm-hmm.
So that's just kind of why I would like to have it. Because, somebody might see multifamily, and this was my concerns. Oh, well, multifamily is a bad thing. We often see that in those development hearings that and that's not really what it's not just multifamily, it's also many other elements. And I just kind of wanted to make sure that it was, that was clarified a little bit, because multifamily sometimes, and I don't agree with this, but sometimes it has a negative connotation. And that's why I kind of wanted to clarify that in the description.
And we definitely appreciate those comments because, all of you who were at the workshop were probably at a different table. Maybe some of you sat together. And I didn't go to all the public events. Kevin went to some of them. And, Jessica had some conversations with people that I didn't hear. So when we were putting all of this together, we did the best we could. But certainly if there are things like that we, slightly mischaracterized or missed something, definitely let us know. But I think you're exactly right. I mean, that is the spirit of this. It's a summary of all the things that we heard. It's basically the role of the contributing factors in what resulted in or what's important in this underlying land use.
Ken?
You could make a motion, somebody could make a motion that you're approving the three scenarios, infill, new centers, and dispersed development, with the storylines and these other, well, I'll just say storylines for right now, with the storylines as supporting or contributing factors to the scenarios.
Yeah, I was just going to say it's a
So
summary
you're only-
of those, and we acknowledge it.
Yeah,
Just
so
an acknowledgement that it's
you're
a
only,
summary.
what you're approving is just
summary of the-
three
A summary of the
three
feedback
scenarios.
from the,
Yeah.
I would feel very much more comfortable because, even though sometimes we get public feedback, just for example, that thing that says it's more expensive to build, that's just not the case.
Right, that's someone's impression of it.
Yes.
Laura?
So, having not attended any workshop, and Sally went to most of the workshops, I came in at the tail end looking at, okay, new centers, infill, that makes total sense to me. But tell me what the difference is between dispersed development and sprawl.
It's pretty much the same. So again, we have to decide exactly what dispersed development looks like in our region. One idea is that it's kind of a trends continue scenario, which is pretty common to have.
So maybe instead of calling it, giving it a label, could we just say everything else? It's either infill or a new center, and then what doesn't fit into those two would be everything else.
We could. I think we liked having actual names for them, but does that name make you uncomfortable, or?
Well, let's just call it sprawl.
I don't know if we're allowed to use
Kind
that.
of PC.
Well, the bottom line is that we don't have a growth boundary, right? We just don't have those types of, so that, whether you call it dispersed or sprawl, it's happening, right?
So
Yeah, and we were trying to keep it neutral as well. I mean, to not use words that are inflammatory. I know some people don't really like the word infill, but it is kind of descriptive of what's actually happening. I guess you could say sprawl is too, but dispersed is a nicer word for sprawl.
It doesn't have as much of a negative connotation.
Correct.
It's like multifamily.
You could use a different word for infill if we can come up with it, you know, that's a little bit more neutral, but
I can't think of one, can you?
no. I mean,
I mean, and that's a traditional thing that's used in land use anyway.
Which we support.
So now that we've kind of wrapped our heads around it a little bit more, any more questions? Someone ready to tackle making a motion?
Okay. I move, we recommend to the board the 3 land use scenarios recommended by staff with the accompanying descriptions as revised. Is that all right?
Do you want to add something about the descriptions being more of a summary of the public, and we acknowledge that it's a summary?
Yeah, so with
Yes.
the revised descriptions being a summary of the public input from the workshops. Is that right?
Does that
I can second that.
work for everyone? We have a motion and a second. Any other discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you, Jennifer.
Thanks for your attention.
If I can, real quick, because this wasn't pertinent to the vote, just from a military standpoint, when you're doing the urban sim and you're looking at your constraints in particular, if you could talk to the joint land use study team and kind of marry up with Plan Colorado Springs and some of the other things that are going on, because we're still very interested in how you depict some of those development corridors and some of the inconsistencies with the approach departure zones to the airport and how the different planning teams look at that, especially for the density of development in some of those areas. And those are all things that are being identified in the J list as pain points between the different municipalities.
Yeah, we are definitely doing that. I bug Tom and Ann regularly. It's
Okay.
nice that we share space upstairs, and we're also working pretty closely with City of Colorado Springs in particular, since they have their comp plan update going on right now, and they're actually starting to look at densities in different neighborhoods, and we want to make sure there's at least some consistency.
They definitely need to be consistent, otherwise you're going to get in trouble when you start going to the board and some of the higher levels who are seeing multiple things.
You and Ken are on the same wavelength. We were just talking about that, so.
Okay.
Have you received the pending developments plans from the city?
Yep,
Okay.
I went to, yeah.
One more question. I know that we're doing our own, but in the same track with the I-25 corridor, you know, there is some work that is going on in coordinating that effort of the two plans. Does that feed into this, Ken, at all?
I'm not sure how it would fit into the urban sim and the growth model, but it'll certainly be a factor in the 2045 plan and whether it's included as a project or not.
And just looking at the numbers that are coming as far as the updated traffic counts and some of those, you know, I mean, that corridor and that connection right there is pretty important, and I think we're starting to see, and have been starting to see a lot of growth in the monument area, and I think that hopefully, you know, maybe it's not this specific thing, but as that's going along, we're making sure that those numbers are tied in and make sense.
Yeah, the north side has been traditionally one of the higher, faster growing areas, even in the Telem model. So we'll certainly see how it compares under the new model. But that's what I would expect, that it would.
And from a
reflect
land
that.
use standpoint, that we look at that as a three-dimensional corridor. So we're looking at the navigation in that area, the flight. So we want to make sure there's not development close to I-25 that further congests that space from a flight standpoint, or that there's compatible uses within that space to flight. Same thing north and south of the Coral Springs Airport. And of course, Schriever's got its own issues with spectrum management and different zones.
Okay, yeah, we'll keep in touch with joint land use.
As soon as we can get NORAD to give us Santa's local flight plan, we can work that in.
Hey, do it every year.
Yeah.
All right, thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Kevin Reyes, long-range transportation plan targets.
Just hate to see a plan that shows explosion right in there.
Good afternoon, Kevin Reyes, Transportation Planner with PPACG. So today we're going to go over the targets that we've been working on for the 2045 long-range plan. Ken filled you in a little bit already. So last week the Board of Directors approved just the objectives for the long-range plan. For those of you who are at the special TAC meeting we held last month, we approved both the objectives and the targets, but the CAC decided to just go with the objectives. So again, the board just approved the objectives. So we had a joint TAC workshop on Tuesday of this week to kind of flesh through the targets that were started by the TAC. And today we're hoping to get a recommendation on the work that was done there. I sent out an email after that workshop. I sent it out yesterday with kind of the revisions that were made. I have some extra copies up here if anyone wants to see that, if you didn't have a chance to print it off. I'll just pass a couple down there. If you want to pass them down that way.
Thank you.
I'll pull them up here on the projector as well. Let's see here. Okay. So again, the joint TAC and CAC workshop that we held, the conversation was again only focused on the targets, and it was focused on the targets that were recommended by the TAC. So that was kind of the starting point there. So on the sheet that I just handed you, you can kind of see the track changes. We changed a few of the targets that the TAC came up with. There are a couple of things I want to point out that we changed that were significant. For under goal number 1, objective 4 for non-motorized, with the TAC we discussed that we simply don't have the data to, right now we don't have the data to know all the current infrastructure condition for non-motorized. So with the workshop, we decided to say for the target, explore options for collecting data / establishing a baseline, and we said by 2021. And so we thought 2021 would be more or less the same time frame when we'll be going through this process again for the next plan. And so we're hoping that by that point we'll be able to either work with the project sponsors to get them to get some data on non-motorized infrastructure, or if PPACG could identify funds here, maybe we might be able to get the data ourselves. So that's kind of how we came up with that number there. Let's see here. Under goal number 3, another change we made. Goal number 3, objective 3, modal integration. We had the same kind of note because it's the same issue. The objective is enhance modal connections and improve existing ADA accessibility. Again, we have the same issue with not having the data available or not having the funding to get the data. So we have explore options for collecting data / establish a baseline by 2021. So same kind of thing there that we established at the workshop. And then if you go to goal number 5, those were the most significant changes that we made at this workshop. So let's start with objective number 1 under the environment. Improve or mitigate impacts to critical habitat, stormwater runoff, quantity, and air quality. So we had some baseline data in there for critical habitats, air quality, and stormwater. Excuse me. We decided not to. I think we decided to use that baseline data more as for reporting purposes, but for the targets, we went a different route than we discussed last month with the TAC. So with critical habitats, we said mitigate impacts to critical habitats as determined through the NEPA process. Air quality, we said meet or exceed state and national ambient air quality standards. And stormwater, we said comply with stormwater best management practices. So we didn't set any specific targets for those. We did set specific targets, but we didn't set anything more ambitious than what the feds are already laying out for us with those three there. For objective number 2, tourism and economy, we decided to look at the commercial vehicle delay we said that, I had a note up here, on the interstate system. It's actually through our significant and strategic corridors, which we identified in our congestion mitigation plan. So we decided to look at those specific corridors and look at the delay in time on those as a way to measure economic competitiveness in the region. And then finally, on the last one here, objective 3 for infill, we said increase transportation investments in infill areas with a focus on existing infrastructure. So this one we decided to measure in 2 different ways. First, we're suggesting to start a baseline at the next call for projects by quantifying the number of projects that are invested in the urbanizing areas, which is going to be based on the 2045 population density, which again, Jennifer's heading up with the small area forecast. And then the other way we suggested to measure this was using the combined index of the cost of living and transportation. So that's the baseline data there. We know kind of what the average household spends of their income on housing and what they spend on transportation. So translating that into a target, we said housing and transportation should not exceed 50% of income per household. And then the other target was increase the number of transportation projects funded in the urbanizing areas. So those are the significant changes we made at the workshop. We got pretty bogged down at the beginning, talking about the first several objectives under goal number 1 and goal number 2. So we did not have a chance to discuss any of the objectives under goal number 3, which is connectivity and accessibility, or the safety goal, which is goal number 4. But the reason that we skipped down to goal number 5 is because that was the most important one to kind of get nailed down, because we had not agreed on how to actually measure those targets. So now that the thing that we accomplished at this meeting is we got everyone on the same page on how we're going to measure everything. So now it's more of kind of a value statement with what you want that number of the target to be. So that's kind of how the conversation got bogged down, is because some people wanted to see, for example, they wanted transit to be improved by X percent, and other people wanted it to be improved by Y percent. So it was just a little bit of a disagreement there, but again, it was mostly on the values. But in terms of how to measure it, we were all on the same page there. So that's where we are today. One thing that I wanted to point out here, just pull this down. Actually, so under the last thing that we need to decide on today, and I don't think it'll be that hard. Under objective number 2, we have economic impact and visitor spending as one of the ways that we could measure that. That was something that the CAC had come up with last month. Just in their discussion, they didn't make a recommendation on it, and I had a note of it under that objective. And I just want to see what we want to do with that today. Again, I'm not sure how we can make that into a meaningful target. So I would recommend that we eliminate that one and maybe just use it for reporting purposes. But again, that's up to the TAC to decide. I'm not sure if I think that's printed out on your thing here. Yeah. So, yeah, I'll open it up for any questions.
Question on the road infrastructure condition, and I know you guys here have the IRA baseline, and my concern about using IRI is that it's only one factor in the overall condition of the road. I know that that's what CDOT uses, and I know that there's been some discussion over that because IRI is really ride quality. So I guess I just have a concern because it really doesn't give the real condition of the road. The PQI actually does. So that's one concern I do have just in general as I look at, your baseline data there. The other question I have is I think these targets are great, but, I have a question of whether you've done kind of just, and this is kind of a overall question, is that right now we have 67% in better or good condition anyway, you have a certain percentage that you have now. So we have then a gap, right? And have you really looked at whether these goals, or has anybody really looked at whether these targets are really accomplishable? Because that delta may be $200 million, and we're never going to get there. I guess that's a concern. Is that, do we actually know, how much investment this community has to do to get to that target?
I guess to respond to your first question, the IRI, that's a great point. Obviously, there's other factors involved just besides the IRI. What we were trying to do here is just kind of set us up to have something to go with going forward. And I think as we continue this process and future plans, we can add on additional data points. But right now, this is all the data that we have from the past. And so this is just kind of a way for us to start and go from there. We currently have a contract underway with a company that's doing IRI, and they're also doing another measurement. It might be PQI as well. So we can certainly kind of add that on to the next plan. But
so that for asphalt, there are many different. PQI is really the quality and what condition it is in. There are 5 or 6 different factors, of which IRI is just one of those. So that, maybe as time goes on, we need to consider looking at that, because truly the IRI really doesn't tell you what condition it is in. It could you could have the nicest ride, and your road is falling apart underneath.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah, we've had that discussion internally. It's a good point, but I think this just kind of gives us a starting point, and we can use this going into future plans. But absolutely.
I think we need to reconsider that as a region.
Mm-hmm.
For this round or for the next?
I don't know. I think if they don't have the data, how can you have a target point? But, I think we really need to consider that.
Yeah, that was our understanding, is that this is what they had, was the IRI. So in order to have a baseline to go off of, that's what we had to go off of. If we want to transition it going forward, we can definitely have that conversation.
I think so, yeah. I think the idea now is I'm really pushing to make sure that this plan is a starting point, and it carries over into future plans, which my understanding is we haven't done that in the past. So I think
and that's fine. But what I don't want to do is have a couple years down the road where we say, hey, we're reconsidering this again, and we're doing the next plan, and we just have the IRI data, and that's what we're going to do. Because I think if that's the case, we're kind of sticking our heads in the sand, because the IRI really doesn't give you a good understanding of the real condition of your roadways and how much investment that you have to do in them.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah.
And I only know that because I know way too much about asphalt.
Yeah, I would agree with Jennifer. We have the data for the IRI that we're collecting this year. We've collected it in the past. It could be considered a proxy for the perfect parameter. If the PQI or any of the other 4 parameters that you're talking about would be a better one, then starting tomorrow, and not 4 years from now, we need to decide that that's what we're going to use in the future rather than the IRI. And we have to start figuring out the funding to obtain that data so that it can be used.
It's the same process. It's just.
Yeah, but we have to make sure if that's what we're going to use on a region-wide comparative basis, then on a region-wide basis, we have to collect the data.
Correct.
Who's going to do that and by when, and that kind of discussion. So that's what we would start as soon as this meeting is over. And I don't know, I'm completely unfamiliar with asphalt or concrete. So if IRI, is it a satisfactory proxy for all 4 categories? If it's not,
PQI is the top one, and there's, PQI really does everything. So,
Yeah, I think that'd be a
Well,
great.
I mean, I could spend a whole day on, on PQI, so I don't want to spend that, but I think that's a good thing. I mean, hopefully, that's something we should talk about as a region.
Yeah, I think that's a great conversation to have. It would go right in with trying to figure out how to get data for the non-motorized infrastructure as well. So we could kind of make sure we get that underway as soon as we get through this process. The second part to your question, you said something regarding you weren't sure if you agreed with the targets that were established, and that was part of the reason that we got bogged down at this last TAC and CAC workshop. Some people wanted realistic targets, other people wanted more aspirational targets. I think that's for both committees to decide what they feel they want. Again, it's more of a values thing. So as long as we're on the same page of how to measure it, I mean, that's all PPACG staff is here for, is making sure that's underway. But I think TAC and CAC have to make their decisions on what they actually want the target number to be. So that's what we attempted to start at this workshop. We got consensus on goal 1, goal 2, didn't get to goal 3, and we got to goal 5. So yeah, that's kind of where we're at.
Are we still thinking that all the goals don't have to have a specific
Target?
Pardon?
Objective? Target, objective? I'm trying to guess what the next word
no,
is.
I'm sorry. When we score the projects, scoring criteria.
What's your question?
Are we still thinking that each proposed target doesn't necessarily have to have a scoring criteria?
I think that's the understanding at this point. Yeah, we haven't delved into
We
that.
haven't
We
voted
haven't
or,
committed ourselves to
Yes.
anything yet.
We'll be going through that process probably next month.
And then I'll just answer Jennifer's second question. At least the first subcommittee meeting we had to go over this, it was more aspirational goals. We kind of know that gap just keeps getting bigger with the dollar amount and the amount of infrastructure we have to upgrade. But the numbers were here in the past, and that's where the initial 90% came from, is we were in that range, and then we just kind of fell off. So we were trying to aspirationally get ourselves back to where we were. So, do you want an answer on your economic?
Yeah. So if there's no other concerns about the targets, I would suggest we go down to the goal number 5 under objective 2. Just want to make sure we're on the same page with this. It says we have the baseline data there, economic impact, visitor spending. Again, I'm not sure how we can take this measurement and turn that into a meaningful target related to transportation projects. So I would defer to the TAC to decide what to do with that.
Tim?
And this came from the CAC?
So the CAC didn't formally recommend that. They just talked about it at the one of the workshops we had with them. And I had it written down, and at this last TAC and CAC workshop, we didn't have a chance to talk about it.
Okay, but and their intent was for tourism, aka visitor.
Yeah, they wanted to address tourism. I mean, tourism is in the objective, but the commercial vehicle delay, and you could argue that would encompass that.
Does anybody have any ideas of how we would want to attempt to target our economic impact, or is everybody okay with Kevin taking it off the list?
Could it be lodging tax?
It could be whatever we want, but the question is, how do you directly relate something like lodging tax to a transportation project and try to make a target from that? That's kind of the hard part there. So I'm suggesting that we certainly acknowledge those indicators like lodging tax and other taxes that tourists spend in the region, maybe in one of the chapters of the long range plan, but we don't try to directly translate that into a target because it's very hard to draw a causation from that to an actual transportation project.
Tim?
Yeah.
I guess maybe thought is all the other elements combined, including non-motorized, kind of all support tourism.
Okay.
So that,
Yeah.
you don't need a specific target, because all of them kind of inherently address it.
Yeah, that's a good
So I
point.
would support dropping it
Okay.
based on that concept.
Anybody want to keep it? And if so, do you have a way to measure it? Okay, Kevin, I think we're okay dropping it.
All righty. I will-
I have a question on the proposed target just above that. We have the 94%, the 4%, and the 2%. Is there a baseline from which we established those numbers, or how did that target come to be since?
I'm sorry, say that one more
Right
time.
above economic impact? Goal 5,
Goal 5, just right above it.
go down. Keep going. Keep going. So, right there in the red, where it's kind of off the screen, you have 94% of the.
Oh, this, okay, yeah.
Where did
Sorry.
those numbers come from? Because the baseline data has a lot of X's in it.
Yes. So you're asking where the 94%, the 4%. Okay, so this came from the same targets that we established under the mobility goal, under Objective 1 and Objective 2. So we
Transferred them down here?
I transferred those down there, but this is only for significant and strategic corridors. So under mobility, we're looking at the vehicle delay on every single road in the region. And now for the economic development, we're saying, okay, well, now we want to do it only for strategic corridors. And then we just use the same targets that we made from that. That's where those numbers are from.
And then on Objective 3 for Goal 5, we have increased the number of transportation projects funded in urbanized areas. So if we do one more, we've met the target?
Well, yeah, technically, yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
I'll take low-hanging fruit, but I just can't believe that target wasn't a tad bit more specific, so.
Yeah, we can make it more specific
That's what
today.
everyone agreed to, but I didn't. It just seemed like we do one more project, we've increased it.
No, that's true. Yeah.
Well, and we talked about this a little last time. I just really have a concern in regards to this because our objective talks about increased transportation investments in infill areas with a focus on existing infrastructure. Not all of the existing infrastructure is in the urbanizing areas. Again, I'm thinking about some of our important strategic corridors or corridors that we want improvements on that really go to the military areas that are not in the urbanizing area. I mean, I think, in my opinion, that we need to make sure that we're focusing on, some of those important corridors, and some of those relate to the military, some of those relate to, a good example like I came up last time with was the Highway 94 corridor. Not all of that is in the urbanizing area, but we talked about transportation, focusing on existing infrastructure. Some of that is in the infill area, and some of that is in a non-urbanizing area. And I just don't want somebody to say, hey, and in the past we gave extra points if it was an infill project, but I guess I just don't want to lose the fact that not all the projects, or most of the projects that we have already are in the urbanizing area, and that doesn't mean that they really should be. So I'm just concerned about having that in there and the way it's worded.
Ramir?
Could we change that infill to significant and strategic corridors?
Well,
I'm willing to go back
yeah.
through this whole.
I mean,
No,
Yeah,
we
I'll
can't
go ahead and
change the
address-
Objective.
I'll address.
Oh, that's right.
Let's
That's,
start
I'm
on the
sorry.
target.
But how
Yeah, that's already been
we can
voted
change
on.
the target.
But addressing Jennifer's concern, that's the reason we have the housing and transportation target in there as well. Our idea would be at the workshop we discussed that it could be kind of a compromise with kind of trying to meet the differing priorities in the region. So the idea with that one, if you were to translate that into a scoring criteria, you wouldn't be limited to the urbanizing area. So you build a bike lane on existing infrastructure out in the county, that's going to score a lot of points because that could potentially, reduce transportation costs. even if you widen a road a road that's not in the urbanizing area, that could be considered an infill project based on the housing and transportation criteria there. So we have two different ways of kind of looking at it. So that's kind of the reason we have the housing and the transportation one.
No, I like that part. Increase is so vague. Just increase the number.
Yeah, we can make a number
If we do
today to
one
attack if we want.
in the urbanizing area, though, then we're done.
Mm-hmm.
And then we've increased. But I don't know if that's what the goal for this is. Ken?
And just to keep things muddy, I'll remind you that we will have 3 urbanizing areas because each scenario will be,
That's
we
true.
will either have a developing area further east or not as far east, or wherever the development goes under the 3 scenarios. And this is the 2045 urbanized, the forecasted area, not what exists today.
Any other thoughts? I don't really know how to fix it per se, but I just think I don't want to be hashing it out later when everybody's trying to define increase.
Yeah, the problem with that one is we just we haven't had a chance to make a baseline with how many projects historically have been in the urbanizing area. So it's hard to
create a baseline instead.
We certainly can.
Talks about that in the above.
Yeah, we have that under the baseline. We say start a baseline during the next call for projects.
Yeah,
So that's kind of the idea of using the word increase because we don't know where we're starting from.
right.
So that's
I'm probably looking at Tim and Jennifer here to say, is this clear enough that moving forward, when we're looking at a project, we'll know whether or not it meets what we're trying to accomplish.
I mean, I think in order to do that, you have to define the urbanizing area. So, I mean, are you looking at all of Colorado Springs as an urbanizing area or just the inner cores?
So the urbanizing area that currently, as I understand, is Falcon, Monument, Fountain, Woodland Park.
Doesn't include all of Falcon, by the way, as it is today, based upon the,
Just the incorporated parts, or?
it's not,
It's not
Falcon's
Not
not incorporated. But
It's the more denser
Right.
parts of.
Yeah.
of
So
the-
that
of the
would give you
region.
your box to count your number of projects that are in those areas.
But I think, usually our goal is, I mean, infill's important, and I think we need to promote that, but the point is that, most of those projects really score well anyway, because we get most of the projects in the urbanizing area, and so my concern is for, the Palmer Lake, the Woodland Park, those areas, especially like Schriever, that's not in an urbanizing area, but those areas are just as important, and when we made the objective, we discussed the importance of investing in existing infrastructure, and that's not even a target.
You say Woodland Park's not in the urbanizing area?
No, some of Palmer Lake is not in the urbanizing, some of those, there's part of Monument that's not in the urbanized area.
So, when it comes down to it, it doesn't matter.
That's
You know
all
what I mean?
wanted to hear.
Politics factors in so much in the end game. It's just like, let's just go with this, Jennifer.
Well, can we say increase the number of transportation projects funded for existing infrastructure? That hits both issues.
Or you could say increase the number of transportation projects with a focus on existing infrastructure, and that gets the objective and the target.
I like that.
It's not any more measurable, but it gets rid of urbanizing areas, so we have a more broader place to put the money.
So that would be detrimental to a project like Stapleton and Bargate Parkway, where there's no existing road. That would, I believe that's in the already in the long range plan.
What was the number one project?
Right. So I would be hesitant about.
So
saying
some of that's not in the urbanizing area.
Right. That's what I'm saying. Let's just go with what's there.
I'm just not comfortable. Some of our most important projects, Gate 19, Schriever 94, some of those things, I'm just really uncomfortable by excluding or making some of those are the most important projects. Parts of I-25 up in the northern area, I don't think are in the urbanizing area. Some of the stuff that goes down to Fountain,
So what's the Fountain Street that just went into Charter Oak?
Charter Oak.
Okay, so that went in, even though it's not in the urbanized area. So that kind of goes to my
Well,
point of.
you should have seen all the work and effort that we had to do to get it
I
in,
still
Tim,
had
when
to
it's
have
just
done it.
ridiculous.
You still had to have done it whether it was in the urbanized area or not. So we're spending a lot of heartache and heartburn on something that, in the end run, the important projects for the community. And they
Rise
happen.
to the top.
Yeah. So
Well, they
so-
don't, and then we have to pull them because then we're changing. Because if you look at the scoring that was done previously, they weren't rising to the top, and so that we had to essentially step in and say these are the most important projects in the region.
I remember that, but there's also based on 17 different goals,
I know.
right?
I'm just
So
saying.
There's a whole different, and we were setting up a whole different system that will hopefully.
I
address-
agree, but our focus was on existing infrastructure, recognizing that we needed to do projects in infill areas, but then we're kind of going a flip-flop on the back end. So you're telling me that, why don't we move on, it's not important, but then, I mean, I feel kind of the same way. If it's not important, then delete it. So,
Well, I don't support saying not existing roads, because there are not existing roads that will be important.
oh, I agree. I mean, we have
So if
some
we're going to do something,
connections.
then increase the number of transportation projects in urbanizing areas by 50% or something. I'd rather go by a percentage.
Right, but we don't have a baseline, which is wherein lies our problem.
Right. But that's where we're going to set one with the next call for projects. apparently.
Right, that's why I'd rather just get rid of it, because we don't have a baseline. So if we do one project in the urbanized area, we've checked the box, and then you have nothing to score it against. But Wendy, go ahead. You had a comment?
Well, I just had a couple of comments. Jennifer's right in the fact that Charter Oak got put as a priority by the fact that they got a Tiger grant. If they had never got the Tiger grant, it would have never gotten escalated to where it's at. And any ideas on how that might affect how we program our money in your area? In areas that you're, because this affects us too. It's not just, we don't get to have a free get out of jail card. We have to follow what you're doing here because this is all reportable. This is all something we have to work together to do. So think about what you're asking us to do as well, because we don't get to play outside of the lines anymore.
So do you have any thoughts on the language, keeping it, deleting it, altering it?
I think you should be as flexible as you can.
Well, it's very flexible as it sits, but it does focus on urbanizing areas, so. Kevin, do you have any thoughts on the discussion you've heard, which way you think we should go?
I would just point out that we have the housing and transportation target in there as well, so I think that does not limit us to the urbanizing area. That's why we have both of those in there. So I think it actually remains pretty flexible by keeping that in there as well. And obviously, we haven't gotten to the scoring criteria yet, but we're keeping it open for that discussion with having both those two targets in there.
Can I suggest where we add transportation projects funded for major employment and urbanizing areas?
Oh,
Because I think that gets your
Shriver.
Shriver concern.
Say that again?
Increase the number of transportation projects funded for major employment centers and urbanizing areas.
What about major,
I think the CAC might have an issue with that. They're really emphasizing making sure things are measurable and reportable. So we would have to define a major employment center.
And this thing made it pass, that's not measurable?
What's that?
This is not measurable. If I increase by 1, I'm done.
Yeah, well, we were really emphasizing just starting that baseline, so we didn't have anything to start from.
Right, that's
Yeah.
why I think it's hard to measure this one, because we don't have a baseline. So I can appreciate the fact that they want it measurable.
Yeah,
This target is not measurable as it's written.
yeah.
So,
All right, we'll do you, and then we'll go to Jennifer.
okay, so how about this? Increase the number of transportation projects funded for major employment centers, comma, major transportation corridors, comma, and urbanizing areas.
Everything.
It's not any more or less measurable than it
Well,
was.
I'm saying, but it addresses.
Right.
Addresses Jennifer's concern, but even with, like you said, if I do one more, I've met the goal, but maybe there was only money for one more.
And it could be one of those three.
And it could be one of those three, but if there's money for two more, or three more, because how many projects are being, are actively being funded at any given time?
But what's the discriminator between those three? What falls out of those three very broad areas? If everything gets the same score, then it doesn't really do you any good.
But it just opens up the eligibility
To
for
everything.
different areas and not just the urbanizing.
I get it, but that's almost every single transportation project you just described.
Well, something way out east.
So what if we just added at the end of that sentence, and existing infrastructure? Increase the number of transportation projects funded in urbanizing areas and existing infrastructure.
But then again, you're accommodating everything. As you're pointing out,
You're
now
not
you have,
excluding anybody,
right.
except for new stuff that's not in the urbanizing area. All right, Jennifer had a thought.
So I like the suggestion about the major employment centers, and I actually think it would be pretty easy to define that just based on number of employees, which we have from the Info USA data. So we could say 100 plus or 50 plus or
Yeah, there's a definition somewhere
whatever.
for major employment.
Okay. And we could do that.
We could figure something out.
Don't
We'd
we
probably
have
have
a
that.
definition of the non-motorized plan, what the work center is? Did we decide that last time?
Yeah, and the regional non-motorized
Yeah.
plan thing, I
Yeah.
think it does.
Yeah.
So I guess if we were to use that term today, we would, during the process of establishing scoring criteria, we could define what a major employment center is.
The problem, if we're forecasting and using the 2045 forecast, we will have the number of employees, but we won't have them, they're going to be per TAS. They're not going to be per building or per square block or something else. So you're right back to what is a definition of an employment center?
Yeah.
Is the medical grow and the hotel right here, is that an employment center and plus PPACG? Or is it 50 people or 500? And what's major? I mean, that's something we've never done in the past because we never had a good agreement. And then how you define it, is it the blocks west of Colorado? Or does it include the blocks or south of Colorado? Or does it include one block north of Colorado as well? Where's, it's kind of a,
All right, let me simplify it then. How about military installations? Just- if we want to get specific.
Well, that makes me happier, but
So that, I mean, if we
That
need
could
that,
work.
if we need that definition, and we know that there are military installations that are important to the community, and they are major employers.
I mean, Fort Carson is the second largest employer in the state of Colorado, so yes, it is.
Exactly.
Non-voting members would concur.
So I'll call it what it is. I'll be even more clear.
Thank you.
Is say the urbanizing area and our military installations.
So increase the number of transportation projects funded in urbanizing area and connecting to military bases, installations.
I still don't like the urbanizing, but I could live with that.
I'm giving you a carrot.
We'll take it.
Well, I just don't want to be held to, just because your project's not in the urbanizing area, it's not important.
Right.
So, we can agree on that, Tim.
How's that?
I don't want to be held because our project's infill. It's
Exactly. No, I mean,
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay.
Does it have to be connecting to, Kevin? Couldn't it just be urbanizing areas, including military installations?
We need the road part of it, though.
I mean, I think the important part is that, recognizing that the military installations, even with their growth, can't do, fund projects to the base, and many times that falls on the local. There are funding sources such as DAR, but that's pretty difficult to get. So, I mean, if we're doing a road improvement, it's connecting to that or providing
Providing access.
Especially when you're looking
Yeah,
at.
PPACG, we can't fund roads on the bases.
Right.
Yeah,
But we
well,
can
and they
off.
can't do the opposite
Exactly.
either.
yeah. So I think connecting to, I think that would be okay
For
to you?
providing service, I mean,
Okay.
Something.
Providing service.
because it may not be directly connecting, but it may be important road.
Okay.
Such as State Highway 16 interchange. Well, that's kind of directly connecting.
Any other questions, comments, thoughts? Did we make it? Are we ready for a motion?
So the motion would just be on rules 1, 2, and 5? Because half of them haven't been.
So I would suggest we make a motion on all of the goals. I was just pointing out that the TAC workshop didn't have time to get to goal number 3, but the TAC last month already made a recommendation for all of those targets, and the CAC might come up with a different number whenever we meet with them next week. But I don't think they're going to change anything significantly. So I would suggest we make a recommendation on everything today.
Has the CAC looked at goal 4?
We didn't have a chance to discuss those either this last meeting.
The CAC will look at those as well.
Yeah, we'll be taking all of this through the CAC in a couple weeks.
Did Brian attend the workshop? I know that, he's not here, and the Mountain Metro Transit is a. Okay,
Brian was
great.
there, yeah. One thing I should actually point out here. So this is not really a big deal, but it's not written the same on this board as it is on the handout you have. I got a call from Aaron Busto today asking me to change the language under goal number 4 for the target. He just wanted me to use consistent with rather than set targets as good as or better. So I changed that. So just for the motion, I would suggest we go with the language that FHWA suggested.
I think that's a great change.
I'll just make a suggestion, I can't make the motion, that the motion could state that TAC is replacing its recommendation from last month with whatever you're recommending today, so that, because you do have a recommendation that you made last month that the board did not act on. So this would just be kind of a way for our own internal records that you're replacing last month's recommendation with something new.
Are we saying we don't need a motion because we're going to wait till next month?
We're hoping to get a motion this month, and then next month we're going to get to the scoring criteria.
The only reason we would need another motion or to look at this again is if the CAC doesn't agree with what we're sending forward to them.
So like Laura pointed out, we didn't do number 4.
But we've done that.
The TAC has done it, but we had a workshop. Yeah, we didn't have time to get to it at that workshop. Yeah.
All right, so I move we replace last month's motion with the recommendations identified at the workshop and the changes proposed today, and that they be presented to the CAC again, with the caveat that should the CAC not support or have a disagreement with one of our recommendations, that again, it comes back to this committee.
Comment. I'm going to say that the CAC is probably going to have a different recommendation with the number on the target. They're probably not going to make a different recommendation on terms of how to measure things. So we're fully expecting to go to the board with 2 different recommendations for the targets. But in terms of how we're measuring it, should be the same.
Okay, which targets?
Oh, which target? Well, actually, it could be any of the. At this TAC and CAC workshop, we had several targets that I did not expect to come up as controversial. So there were several transit targets that some people wanted aspirational, and Brian Vituli was very adamant about keeping them realistic. So really, it could be anything. So I don't know.
You didn't feel like when we left that target that everybody was feeling good about it?
Not at all.
I fully agree with him that some of these are not realistic, but, you know.
Correct.
You felt like they were in agreement on it?
Okay, I'll remove the portion of if the CAC disagrees with any
Okay, I think that'll.
recommendations from my motion.
Mhm. I think that's gives us some flexibility there.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you want to add in the change?
Yes, and my motion does include the change recommended by FHWA to replace good with consistent with on the proposed target for goal number 4.
Does that include the discussion we had on the proposed target for objective goal 5, objective 3? Any of the other changes we discussed today?
Yes, it did.
Okay.
Do you have a second?
Second.
Any more discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, Kevin.
Good.
Item 6C, year 2017-2022.
Alrighty, so tip amendment 12 comes in 2 parts this month. The first part is coming from the city of Fountain. During the rollover process that we did last month with all the projects that we rolled over, we omitted Fountain's project of the pedestrian and ADA enhancement. So with that project, we're rolling forward $120,000 of federal TAP funds with a $30,000 local match. And so that's the first part. The second part, we're changing the unprogrammed amount of funding available in TAP in fiscal year 2018. I'll go down to the spreadsheet here. It's attachment number 2 of your packet. As you can see, last month I specified how much unprogrammed funding we had in TAP. I said it was $205,000. We now have $106,000 unprogrammed. And the reason for that is there's 3 different reasons. Fountain's project rolling forward had reduced the amount of unprogrammed funds there. There's an $87 true-up from fiscal year 2017 that CDOT has given to us. And El Paso County has returned $21,000 to the pool, so that made it go back up a little bit. So that's the reason we have the unprogrammed funding there.
The true-up is a negative amount, not a positive.
Yeah, the true-up is a negative, so that made it go down. This originally would be a TIP administrative change. I wanted to bring it as an amendment just because we are changing the unprogrammed amount because the next item on the agenda is going over the call for projects, and this is going to impact that.
Start of the new tip.
So that's everything for amendment number 12.
Move approval?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, motion carries. Next item. Do you have a burning question?
Well, Tim Kirby is here representing CDOT from Denver to make the presentation on the item 7B, the transportation toolkit. He asked to leave at 3:30. He's wondering if we could change the agenda at this point and
Or we can reschedule for next.
I just think that 20 minutes is not going to do what he needs to do justice, so we should just reschedule it for next month, honestly. It won't make any difference.
So the presentation is really helpful. It does invoke a good amount of conversation, which is exactly what
We start losing our quorum here about 3:30, and we do have a major item coming up. So is there a timeline on your topic?
Because you guys meet monthly, if I gave you this, because it's a series of presentations, you'll far exceed your counterparts quickly. So I'm not in any immediate or urgent need to bring it today.
Okay.
Yeah, 7B.
Can I get a second? Anybody want a second?
I'll second, sorry.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Well, thanks for coming down, Tim, and we will see you next month.
I think it's wonderful, vigorous conversation that's going around, so this is a good thing.
You're all very involved, and we all much appreciate it. We look forward to seeing you soon. Now, item 16. Fiscal year 2019-2022 tip schedule, resource allocation, call for projects, categories.
All right, so we are kicking off the 2019 to 2022 TIP application process and call for projects. So for today, I just wanted to kind of go over our ideas of what we're going to be doing for this next TIP. If you all remember, the board approved a TIP policy a couple months ago, the TIP flexible funding policy that replaced the not one penny extra policy, which made us go from a 6-year TIP to a 4-year TIP. So this next TIP is not adding any new funding years. The current TIP is 2017 to 2022. This one is 2019 to 2022. So we're suggesting that for this next call for projects, we use the funds that have not been programmed from the current TIP. So if you go down to page 5 in attachment number 1, you'll see how many dollars we have available in the funding categories, just based on what's not been programmed. So we have CMAQ, TAP, STP, Metro, and then we have the small projects category as well, which is 5% of STP Metro. This was part of the policy that we had approved by the Board of Directors just before Christmas last year. And that, again, we were trying to help small project sponsors get their projects funded. So we said a small project is defined as anything that is 5% or less of STP Metro. And if we don't use those funds, then those will go back into the general fund of STP Metro. So, for example, on program fiscal year 2019, we have $286 available in the small project category. That's probably going to go back into the general fund there. But I just kind of broke it out so we can kind of see what we have. So this is what is available. I want to point out here that for CMAQ in fiscal year 2020, PPACG may be redesignated as an attainment area. So these funds might not be available, but we got some new news today that looks like we're going to be redesignated well after this date. So we're fairly certain that these funds will, in fact, be available. But there is some risk if you apply for those CMAQ funds in 2020. Just be ready that they might not actually be there. One other thing I want to point out: all the funds in fiscal year 2018, these are all eligible to be used for project cost overruns right now in the current TIP, because again we passed that new flexible funding policy that allows us to address cost overruns. So if a project sponsor comes to us at the next quarter and they need additional funds for their project, then it would come from one of these. So these actually might not fully be available either for 2018. So that's the resource allocation amounts there. Page 3 kind of gives you the schedule of how we're thinking that this 2019-22 TIP is going to play out. So August, we're recommending approval of the TIP schedule. We're recommending approval of the resource allocation, and we're announcing the call for projects with the TAC and the CAC. September, we're hoping the board will approve the call for projects, and at that time, the call for projects will last until November 30th. So that gives you a couple months there for the call for projects. And then in December, December through January at the TAC meetings, we might have a workshop with the TAC to kind of do some horse trading and figure out how to optimize the funding we have to get as many projects in the TIP as possible. Oh, yes.
I have a question for you. You know, we sat in the workshop and we talked about how we were going to ensure that we had projects that were completely eligible and functional to be able to go forward. So we talked about having a review in that process, and the review's not in your timeline. How do we build that back in here? So we talked about having the local agency coordinator from CDOT come in and help each of the entities make sure that their project didn't have any fatal flaws. And you need to have that time for that to happen, because if you take these projects, you score them, and then we can't build them, then we have a problem. So we're back where we were at. We're having projects that can't be built, and we have money that's not being spent. So we want to not go backward. We want to move forward. So we want to make sure that we have that review time built in.
How much time do you think we'll need for that?
I don't know. It depends on how much money and how many projects we get. So, I
mean, as the schedule we have right now, do you see that allowing enough buffer time to be able to work with project sponsors?
So as soon as you get the projects submitted, we should start working on that process with the entities, is my opinion.
Okay. So
How would this review work, Wendy? Is your project coordinator going to meet with the individual entities?
That's the plan. That's what I've talked to him about this kind of in depth. So as soon as you would submit your projects, we should, for consideration, then we should look at them to make sure that they're realistic and that there aren't any fatal flaws. And then that information goes back to PPACG before you have scoring and awards and all the other processes happen. That way, if there's some issue that we can fix, we fix it and the project stays a real submission that way. Otherwise, it's dead.
Could that be done during the 2 months of the call for project?
Yeah,
That the
sure.
project sponsor could meet with,
Sure.
and I can't remember his name.
Scott.
And they could review the projects that they're going to submit. So before they're submitted, they would have been reviewed, and then a determination could be made, well, this project is not good enough, so we
Right.
won't submit it at this time. The projects have already been scored, because under the new policy, the projects must be currently in the 2040 plan.
Okay.
They've already been scored, so it would
It would
be.
make it easy to do
It
it
would be this new review step that we want to introduce, but that could be done before people submit the project.
Correct, it could be, yes. And
Yeah,
that's
thanks
how we
for-
should do it. So,
Thanks for clarifying that, Ken. Yeah, we're proposing here to use the projects already in the fiscally constrained list of the 2040 plan. We're not asking project sponsors to apply a completely new project that wasn't in the plan already. It's already been scored.
Okay, I understand that, but recognize that, for example, and this is kind of out there, but, you know, I-25 is currently not in the fiscally constrained plan, and my guess is that there's probably going to be some consideration to fund that project, or at least some discussion by the board, so.
There will be discussion at the board. I think it's already a voter issue for the RTA to put money onto that. Yeah, it would take a couple of months to amend the plan, to put it in, to make it a current. So far, that topic has not been brought up to the board, even by the same people who are bringing it up to the RTA.
Well, I mean, some of those people are brand new and
Well, they
don't
have,
really
they have
truly
been
understand the
researching,
process.
they have been
too.
researching the availability of federal funds.
Yeah, I mean, we are doing that. I'm just saying, I mean, recognize that, I think what we said is that those projects would probably get preferential treatment, but I don't think we said that you couldn't submit a project if it wasn't in the plan.
That's what the board approved.
Well, I'm guessing that the board may reconsider that, especially since we have a whole entire new board. Anyway.
Can you remind me also, didn't we agree that if we were going to look at our current program projects to see if short funding or anything was like that was part of it, or did we drop that? I can't remember.
I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
I thought we did.
If we included where we would examine our current program projects, actually, I think we said we changed the scope. Okay, where we analyze our current funding levels to see if our project is still whole, and if monies became available, we'd look at it, or did we wind up where we would change the scope? I can't remember where we wound up.
You may change the scope. Or you may take money that falls out of the sky. That's what the new policy.
Just change the scope, or what else?
Or use the money that fell out of the sky, like reconciliation money and unloaned money, and that's what we have in 2018.
Okay.
You know, and that's the dilemma that we now have. Do we use that money instead of the call for projects? Does it go for cost overruns? In the first check with everybody, nobody had a cost overrun. So in 2 months, we'll be checking with you again. And at that point, if somebody has a cost overrun, then that 2018 column that Kevin showed will be reduced, and the amount available in the call for projects will be reduced.
So we are accepting new projects?
Yeah, there's a little under $5 million available for the new tip.
Sorry, it doesn't take me.
But there's no new years. This is money that's in the current tip that's not been programmed.
Right.
However it got there, that's the picture today. So is there $5 million worth of projects that people want to do between now and 2022?
Heck, yeah, right?
And one of the options that's been kicked around behind the scenes, you know, could we take all of that money and put it on I-25?
And I'm not suggesting that, I'm just
Oh, no, but it has
recognizing
been.
that-
It has been,
that
not by
that's-
you.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I can say that the city of Woodland Park is looking at repairing and building all their sidewalk infrastructure. So we should get together with CDOT to come up with a proposal for a submittal for one of these tip calls.
It's not in the plan.
If they're not in the plan, then under the current policy, it would not be eligible. But I think Woodland Park's got a couple projects in the plan. I have to go back, I don't know for
You
sure.
have to go back to the 2040 plan and look at the projects that were accepted and which ones are sitting in funded and what are sitting in non-funded. Above the line, below the line. There's a list in the plan.
Yeah, there's table 8.1, chapter 8 of the plan, it's the fiscally constrained list, there's about 200 some projects in it.
Yeah, I think all those
Then a page later is table 8-2, which were the projects that were considered last time that did not get chosen for funding.
Okay, so it sounds like, as we have this schedule so far, it sounds like we'll have enough time to integrate the CDOT consulting in there. So I'll continue on here. So again, back in December of this year, that's kind of when we'll have the time with the TAC to have the horse trading workshop, figure out what projects we can actually get funded in the TIP. In January of 2018, with the TAC and the CAC, we'll recommend the fiscally constrained list of projects released for public comment. In February, the board will approve the release for public comment. In March, the public comment period will continue, and then with the TAC and CAC, we'll recommend the 2019-22 TIP for approval. And in April, we're hoping to get board approval on the TIP. So we left in a couple of months of buffer room there. The final date we can have this thing approved is in June. So if there's any delay, we can push it back. But right now we're shooting for April of 2018. When did you have something?
Go ahead.
Go ahead. Go ahead. I think you're going to say the same
You
thing.
go
Go
ahead.
ahead.
You go ahead first.
Our current TIP expires in June of next year. If we don't have the new one approved, then there is no authorization, no work can be done on any existing project. And by approval, it means it has to be approved by the governor. So it's got to be approved by us. It's got to be incorporated into the STIP. And so getting the board approval in June is almost really too late. There'll be 2 or 3 weeks where everything will be frozen.
Okay.
So I think May is your drop dead date.
So maybe May. Okay.
Yeah.
So we'll have
Board meeting.
1 month.
That
If something really needs to be pushed back, we'll have a month to do it at this point.
Yeah.
So this is based upon the 2040 plan, the 2040 scoring criteria and all of that?
Yes. So what we're asking for project sponsors to do, if you want to get one of your projects funded, go to the fiscally constrained list and give us the, I'll show you we have an application here. Let me bring it
Is
up.
it the same application then?
No, this one is a lot smaller than the one you originally did. So you just got to.
No matter how Victoria's feeling, she's going to smile at this.
So this is just the template. So you just, to say what the project sponsor is, the project name, as written in the 2040 RTP. And then the important thing for us is getting the project cost in 2017 dollars, because obviously if it's in the 2040 plan, it's not in 2017 dollars. The funding category that you need, CMAQ, STP, Metro, or TAP, and then the years that you are requesting the funding, and that's all we need. And we'll just use the original project score from there.
I think you also need to have something there in case there's a scope change or there's something that has come to light that the entity knows that changes that application by some means, because you wouldn't want them, again, to submit something we can't build. So what if they know that there's some environmental issue that's a problem now and they need to address that? So you need to have something else there, because from the time that we submitted those to today, things changed.
Okay. That's a good idea. So maybe we'll have a sixth thing in there and just say, just if there's any scope change, explain that.
Explain, yes.
Okay.
Exactly.
All right. We'll add that in there. That's a good point.
Because that makes it fair, so that way if they know that they can't build the original project, they can at least come back with something of utility that still works, like we discussed.
Yeah. And so our plan right now, we're taking this to the CAC, take it to the board next month. As soon as the board approves it, the call for projects will start. At that point, I'll send an email to the TAC with a link to this template. It will be on our website. You can access it on there and just fill it out and send it to us electronically.
So even though it's not approved by the board, can you add number 6 and send it to us as electronic file so we can
Oh, yeah.
start coding?
Yeah.
with our-
Just send you the template here?
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Basically, the template's just a spreadsheet, and you can just copy these five. We'll just have 20 or 100 little sections on that one spreadsheet. and
Yeah,
you just
so
have to plug it in. Now, if you're going to change the scope and want to add a new scope, that's going to make it a little bit longer. Maybe we can use sub-pages or something for scope changes or something. Otherwise, we'll just use the scope from your original project.
Yeah. So on here, this is a Word or a PDF, but it was made in a Word document. On the website, it's going to be in a Excel spreadsheet, because that'll make it easy for us to list it. So I'll send this to you all, but don't fill out your application on this actual form. So
You can have it ready and then fill it out on the website or wherever you want.
yeah.
You want it in 2017 dollars, not 2018 dollars?
What do you think, Ken? We discussed 2017.
Whatever you're
I guess
we're in 2017 calendar year, so the entities are going to have to be updating their cost from when they calculated their project cost for the 2040 plan. That was approved 2 years ago. If their project cost was current a couple of years before that, whatever year you want to bring it forward to. We will then take it, whether,
Move it wherever it needs to be.
we will, if the project is going to get funded in 2020, then we will inflate the cost out to 2020, but we just need to know that everybody has the same starting point. Either whether 2017 or 2018, it doesn't matter. We're in 2018, and by the time the TIP is approved, it'll be for 2019, so there'll be no projects in 2018,
Right.
fiscal year. So whatever your preference is, whatever's easier for you in terms of calculating a current cost. I don't know if it makes any difference. But
When you send that out, can you send out the link so people don't have to search for it for those projects that were already scored?
You're talking about sending out the link,
Projects?
sending the link to the fiscally constrained list?
Yeah.
Yeah, we can send that
That would be
as we
helpful.
send out the,
It's on our website under the transportation. There's a link to the plan. It's chapter 8.
I know where it is. I mean, not everybody knows where
Yeah,
it is, though,
okay.
Ken. That's why I was trying to make it easy for everybody.
Sure.
And we have any
One
questions?
click and you're there. We'll get
Yeah.
you.
I'm going to be a little bit nitpicky. Page 3, 2017, December, where we say horse trading, have like a negative connotation. Is there any way we can change that to collaboration?
absolutely.
Scrub that.
You've been doing this
PC.
longer than I have, so
It's the gut check on the numbers.
Yeah. What do we always call it? The professional planner expertise or something?
I will make that change and have it out for the CAC and board.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Kevin, we've interrupted you greatly, but have you gotten your point across, or is there anything you want to see?
I think so at this point. This packet and attachment 1, for those of you who haven't gone through this project submission process, it kind of gives you a synopsis on what each funding category is and how each project might be eligible for it. So just read through that if you're not familiar. It should kind of outline everything. But if you have any questions, of course, just email me or Ken, and we'll make sure to help you along the way. Hopefully, I think it's pretty clear. We're just using the same project scores as the 2040 plan. So this is a little more simple than normal.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And for those people not involved in the past, part of the horse trading is you may want to use CMAQ funds because you don't have a match for them under certain categories, or it's a 20% match, or STB Metro that only has a 17% match. And so, you're looking for the cheap match. But based on the scores, maybe that funding category is already used up. So if you want to be funded, you might we could fund you under a different funding category, but there'd be a 2 or 3% difference in the match. And so that's part of the thing. And you might not get the year you want because the funds are gone, but we could put you a year earlier or a year later or something. And so that's part of this horse trading. And obviously, you have to be prepared to say, yeah, we agree with that increased local match. We can afford that. And we agree with moving a year different, and that allows somebody else's project to be added to it. Because we're trying to maximize the number of projects that get into the tip. So that's part of that horse trading. And
Last time we had applied for Metro funds for some signalization enhancements, and we moved those into CMAQ because they were eligible, so that we could free STP money up for other projects.
for other things that are not eligible for CMAQ.
So do you need a recommendation?
Yes, I think going forward that'd help run this a little more smoothly. We're hoping to get a recommendation on the tip schedule, tip application policies, resource allocation, and call for projects. I have it all bundled into one there.
Any more questions, comments? Motion?
You good? I recommend the PPACG FY 2019-2022 tip schedule, resource allocation, tip application policies, tip application template, and call for projects for approval, or recommended approval to the board with the change of changing horse trading to collaboration.
Yep.
Hopefully prior to the CAC mail out.
Yeah, I'll change it today, right now. Yep.
There's a second?
And adding review to the
Yes.
project review.
Oh, yeah.
And adding project review to the list.
Okay, that's good. And I'll do that between September and
November.
between
Needs
this,
to be done
yeah.
before they're submitted.
Okay, so between September and November, we'll have the review.
So that's something you could actually start right now if you know
Yes.
what projects you're considering. And
Okay. Yep. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Do you have a second?
Second.
Any more discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
I would just like to suggest, I think that PPACG staff might want to alert the board if it's not in the memo, and I didn't read it in there in regards to the fact that this is in regards to projects that are currently in the fiscally constrained plan, because I think that there have been some circumstances since that plan was done that they may want to reconsider. And that's up to the board.
Okay, you're ready for item 7A.
I don't believe everybody signed it yet. Some people came in afterward.
I'm John Hall with CDOT, art resident engineer. My unit is doing the ES24PL study. The hat here is Andy Steckline. He is the CDOT project engineer for this project. And Stacy Shore is, that's about all I'm going to say, because she's going to go ahead and give the presentation to give you guys a hopefully pretty brief but quick update on how the project's going.
We're going to try it to be really brief, get you guys out of here. But the US 24 PEL study, am I going to find the right button? There. Okay, so the study corridor starts at Powers Boulevard in Colorado Springs and goes to the El Paso County line just east of Rama. So it's 40 miles long and encompasses quite a difference in character surrounding the corridor, classification, and even traffic volumes. So we've broken it up into 5 segments that you can see the colors here. There's 2 segments on the west end that are about 5 miles, one's 6, one's 4 long, and the other 3 are about 10 miles long. So we are following the planning and environmental linkages study process that includes all of these steps with FHWA and CDOT. All of these steps basically set up the recommended projects for quicker and hopefully more effective implementation. So things that we do now set them up and do not have to be done again as projects move forward into NEPA and further design. So as far as agency coordination, we have a technical advisory committee. We've had 10 meetings of that group that you can see there, all of those entities. We also have an executive committee. We've had 3 meetings. They are the same entities, just the elected officials and executive staff from each. And important for the PEL process is that our coordination with resource agencies. So at 3 points in the study, we coordinate with the resource agencies in the area. And that's really key for the next steps in NEPA in identifying the type of clearance that will have to be done for projects, as well as the critical resources. So public involvement, we have 3 public meetings. We've had 2 so far in the study, and we have a 3rd. It's not schedule confirmed yet, but late September, early October. It will likely be in Falcon. We're just looking at which venue at this point, and we'll be presenting the draft study recommendations there. We also have a project website, the link shown there, and we've had individual stakeholder meetings with several people along the corridor, including the Air Force bases and emergency service providers, Colorado motor carriers, so people that really use the corridor itself, as well as have property surrounding the corridor. So an important part of the PEL process is developing a project purpose and need. So this was developed after the evaluation of existing as well as future conditions along the corridor. It was developed with the Technical Advisory Committee, and it was presented to the public at the first public meeting and agreed upon. It really is used throughout our alternatives evaluation process. So what we have as a purpose and need is related to regional and local mobility, traffic operational issues, and safety concerns. Of course, with the 40-mile corridor, it was a little tricky. These seem pretty bland. However, along the corridor Obviously, the specific types of mobility and operational issues are different. Like on the west end, they're more related to congestion, where on the east end, they're more related to the lack of passing lanes, especially with slow-moving vehicles within the rural area. Also, intersections without turn lanes, out in the rural areas are also affect operational issues as well as that local mobility. The safety is also different. We have more rear-end collisions on the west end, of course, related to the congestion and the traffic signals, where on the more rural areas, we have more off-road and higher speed accidents. We also developed additional project goals. They were developed with the Technical Advisory Committee, and they work as additional criteria for the alternatives evaluation. So the alternatives evaluation process, we are following NEPA standards, and we're going through 3 levels of screening. The first level of screening we completed and showed to the public, and that was going through concepts, general concepts, to look at fatal flaws as well as those related that do not meet the purpose and need. So we developed that purpose and need and then checked the concepts versus that. Moving into level 2 screening, we started to evaluate alternatives against each other as well as the purpose and need, and also looked at additional project goals. So pulled in more evaluation criteria at that point. So in level 3 evaluation and screening, so we are at that point right now, it's in process, and we're doing more detailed analysis and showing the potential benefits as well as impacts. And out of this, we're coming up with recommendations for improvements and identifying projects. So I'm going to just basically go through where we're at with looking at recommendations. So from powers to constitution, that's that first segment on the west end. We are looking at widening to 6 lanes, as well as interchanges at Mark Sheffield, Colorado 94, and Constitution. In level 3, we're also considering 4 lanes with peak period shoulder lanes. So those would operate as 6 lanes, but only during those rush hours with a reduced cross-section width. So looking at that as potential for earlier implementation. And we also looked at 8 lanes, and at this point we are not recommending 8 lanes within this section because looking at the operations, we still would require interchanges at those 3 locations, and there would be higher costs and impacts with 8 lanes when we get acceptable operations with 6 lanes and interchanges. So looking at Constitution to Falcon, so this is actually through the Woodman Road intersection. We're again looking at a recommendation of widening to 6 lanes. There's intersection improvements within that section. They all are at grade, and they do operate acceptably at that point. We are also considering the peak period shoulder lane alternative for earlier implementation, as well as with the other western segment. So Falcon to Peyton. So going from Woodman to Rex Road, which Rex Road is an intersection that is planned in the future just east of Stapleton. So in that section, so basically through the Stapleton intersection, it would be widened to 4 lanes. And then to the east of that, it would remain 2 lanes, but with additional passing lane opportunities. And those passing lanes would be located west of Peyton. And then we would also have intersection improvements within that area, both to the traffic signals as well as unsignalized intersections, additional turn lanes, XL, decel lanes. So from Peyton to Calhan, we are looking at 2 lanes with new passing lanes, and the passing lanes are located eastbound coming out of Peyton and then westbound coming out of Calhan. In Calhan, we're looking at keeping it 1 lane in each direction, however, doing median improvements, raised median in certain areas to facilitate pedestrian crossings as well as speed mitigation. And we're also looking at intersection improvements in that section. And Callahan to Rama, we're again looking at 2 lanes with new passing lanes. Those are eastbound out of Callahan and westbound out of Rama, and including intersection improvements at the more major rural intersections in that area, turn lanes, basically. So in addition to those cross-sections and infrastructure elements, we also considered other elements such as technology as well as system management. So on the left, you can see the technology elements that we have defined in each of the segments as they're appropriate. For example, enhanced signal detection obviously is at traffic signals and not in the more rural areas that don't have traffic signals. But really the technology is being recommended in locations to optimize operations and safety. And then the system management, we went through and defined some of those elements to help manage demand, particularly in the western half, but we do have some in the eastern half as well. So next steps, as I said, we have a public meeting coming up in which we're going to present draft study recommendations. After that public meeting, we will finalize the recommendations and we'll document them in a PEL study report, and that will include prioritized projects out of that with an implementation plan. So there will be recommendations, but then they will show an implementation plan as far as which ones are prioritized over others. And we're also working, particularly in the west end, on volume triggers for things like widening as well as major intersection improvements. And that's all I had. Any questions?
Who's the city's representative on your technical team?
It's Zachar
Eliza.
Has
he been participating?
Yes, he has.
And did
And Kathleen has also come a few times.
and has the Banning Lewis Ranch Master Plan been part of all of the analysis?
Yes, so we
Especially the access points to US 24.
Yes, so US 24 has an access control plan that actually pulls in several of the agreed upon access points for Banning Lewis Ranch, particularly in that area. Obviously between in that second segment, so Constitution to Falcon. So all of those locations we have put in our modeling. We have shown what we are showing as far as volumes and what the intersections need to look like. And then for CDOT, we're looking at, okay, before that occurs, what can they do in those areas?
Is the access control plan the previous one done by CDOT, or is this new with this study?
This is the previous one completed by CDOT. It is still the access control plan within that area.
Well, I was part of that one, and in that study, we left Constitution to, like, that last mile there, like, to be determined because of the Banning Lewis Parkway. So, yeah.
No, that is not shown in the access control plan, so that is not in there.
So, I remember being part of the study, and the Banning Lewis Parkway comes in right at Constitution.
Oh, at Constitution, like, where they, you mean the one that's parallel and comes in there? So that's in our model and such, but as far as the ones that are crossing, those crossing points and those allowable accesses to US 24, those are accounted for.
How does Banning Lewis Parkway cross US 24?
I don't believe it does.
Oh, it does.
In the access control plan?
In the access control plan and in your PEL analysis.
I don't think in the access control plan it has that.
No, it does not.
That part, if you look in the notes, because when we were doing the access control plan, that was the part that, hey, we can't figure this out right now.
Yeah.
So there's a section in there where that was like a to be determined because we didn't figure that out.
So they talk about the Banning Lewis interchange. Is that what you're talking about? And the fact that the right-in, right-outs and things like that, as well as Constitution. So in the location of Constitution, yes, looking at that, and that is part of the Constitution intersection and ultimate interchange.
So I guess, as far as land development and our approved master plan and what's existing out there, there was no recommended solution, and it was kind of punted to I believe, actually this process. And I'm kind of curious how, and that's why I was asking who's part of it, because I don't know if Zach or Kathleen brought it up.
Oh, they definitely brought up Banning Lewis Ranch, and more in the modeling, future modeling, and the volumes themselves, as well as following the access points that were in the access control plan. It was not brought up, and it was not part of the study to try to figure out what Banning Lewis Ranch additional access needs to happen.
Well, it crosses that Constitution, and that's where if you have these three facilities, Constitution, Banning Lewis Parkway, and US 24 all at one location, it doesn't work.
Well, and you're right, it doesn't work, so that's why, I mean, we certainly have not anticipated anything like that doesn't work. I mean, it's not part of our, nobody's brought that up as a significant issue, it's not part of the access control plan.
So ours has the volume from Banning Lewis Parkway coming in at Constitution. Mm-hmm. Yes. Yes. And as requested by Kathleen and the City of Colorado Springs, we are not determining how those intersections look. We are determining if they are at grade or interchanges and at what volumes those may need to be based on volumes on US 24. But it was determined that we did not want to lay out interchanges or what interchanges needed to look like.
Okay, but I think we're, and I'm not saying what's right or wrong, but I think it's something we can't ignore, to be honest, because when you have a major roadway that it used to be a freeway type facility, but now my understanding is downgraded in the Banning Lewis Ranch master plan.
Mm-hmm.
But it's actually it's going to be carrying higher volumes in Constitution, and to ignore that roadway as everything approaches US 24, I think that's something we shouldn't just.
So if you would like us to consider that, then we need to see a plan that shows that what we need to follow.
What's in the master plan? And the crossing's right at Constitution.
As well as what you would like us to look at, so we can see if it is consistent with our projections at Constitution. But how they come together, at Constitution as far as west of US 24, that was not for us to figure out.
So the model ties in a node on Constitution
Yes.
rather than US 24.
Yes.
Maybe something you want to discuss internally
Separate.
and then may come back. I mean, just a suggestion. I mean, I know that Kathleen, right or wrong, gave specific direction to the project team. So, I mean, I think if they're, I think now, I mean.
Now's the time.
Really late
Now's
in
the
the
time.
game.
It
No,
has to.
It's past time.
I mean, it is, but I'd rather
We can
have the
still,
discussion now than
yeah.
have the discussion in January 2019,
Yeah.
right?
Well, and that's what I want to know. I need to know who to speak with and with the.
Well, and last month Corey was the representative at the executive team level, so.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes, so I can give you my card and you can give us whatever information you can about it. And we can definitely review what we have as far as at that point on US 24. But it is worth noting that at the intersection locations, specifically within Colorado Springs, we are not providing recommendations of intersection or interchange configurations.
But there would be an interchange there.
Yes, we're saying future interchange or at-grade intersection. We have configurations that we assume for our analysis, but it was requested that we do not provide those as specific recommendations.
They did provide the master plan, I'm hoping.
They provided some information. It was not comprehensive. So I may have missed it. Did we have that presentation in our packet?
I'll email it.
I'm assuming people probably want that. If you don't have it, if you can, just email it out so everybody has it.
I'd just like to thank the project team. I think that they've done a great job so far, and you know, we really wanted to make sure that this project got started so that, you know, we're not 10, 15 years down the road and wondering why we didn't start this process. And from my standpoint, especially land use, as we move forward within the land use, especially a lot of this is in unincorporated El Paso County, I want to make sure that we're planning for the right-of-way that's needed so that we're not spending a ton of money on purchasing right-of-way from stuff that's already developed, because it seems like usually we don't have enough money for most of these projects until, you know, it was needed 10 years ago. So at that point, then we're buying right-of-way. And so I just wanted to thank PPACG. I know you supported us getting money. We've gotten money from the CFR for this, the Central Front Range, and I'm very excited that we're this far with the project and moving it forward. So, and thanks to CDOT and staff for all their hard work.
And we will definitely let you know when our public meeting is scheduled so that you guys can all come out.
Thank you for the update. Any
Thanks.
other questions? Thank you. Member ST announcements.
I wanted to say thank you to Brandy for introducing Ben Sheets. I also want to say that the City of Woodland Park is very happy that we have Ben Sheets on board. And I, as an alternate, will step back and Ben will become. So, thank you for tolerating my questions.
So if you have not already heard about it, we have a new web mapping tool. I have some postcards related to it, but if you are interested in writing it down, it's just mapping.ppacg.org. We have these postcards because we're trying to get people to go to the website and drop a pin, leave a comment about needs in the region. It's totally open-ended. You can complain about a sidewalk, a pothole, a trail connection, whatever. So we have some more of these upstairs. If you want some, please take them. I'll leave them at the front table. Thanks.
Anybody else?
Just want to mention our Board of County Commissioners on the 29th and 5th will be considering a possible ballot measure regarding a Tabor reset, and some of the things that they may be considering is funding that stays within the community, may be going to local roads, parks, fire flood recovery projects, and also possibly I-25. So just want to let you know about that, because even if you don't attend those meetings, they are they are live streamed. You can find it on the county website under our Board of County Commissioners subheading.
I'd like to invite people to a North Nevada Avenue open house. It'll be at Tap Traders Meeting Space, which is just north of the Kmart Center on Fillmore, Nevada. It's next Wednesday at 6 p.m.
And then I just wanted to say that CDOT has awarded the contract to AECom to design the retopping of I-25 from exit 128 to South County. So, great town of Fountain. So, thanks for everybody's support. Thanks for CDOT's support. And we're looking forward to it. Anything else?
One other thing, the next I-25 meetings are in October, late October, so watch the CDOT website, and they are going to be launching a campaign called Mind the Gap, Safety on I-25, so that's very exciting.
Anything else? Items for future TAC meetings?
Well, hopefully we get targets done. We'll start talking about scoring, project scoring for the next plan.
Are you going to, do you anticipate workshops for that as well?
I know we're going to start talking about it internally tomorrow. We'll kind of see what we come up with. You know, it's all new players at the table, so do we stick with 1 through 9 or go to -5, +5, or 1 to 3, or what? I mean, we're kind of relooking at everything here, and so we'll see. And I know nobody likes to have extra meetings, but we'll see what we need.
Understand.
I think we talked about trying to start out with joint meetings because that was a lesson learned from the targets and objectives. So perhaps.
Joint meetings with the
TAC and
SAC
CAC.
Okay.
Probably wise, 'cause save you headaches in the long run. I'd like to say also, you guys are still doing a great job and being short-staffed and kind of keeping things moving along, and it's quite impressive.
Thank you.
I really do also appreciate, you listening to all the feedback and taking that into consideration.
Not dismissing it.
Yes.
So we have Rock Rimmon coming next month, is my understanding, of a major project going on I-25 Rock Rimmon that needs to be put on the agenda for next month for TAC, CAC, and following month of the board.
And Tim's
And,
toolkit.
yeah, if we have time to do that. Look at your schedule. I mean, that can even wait another month after that if it doesn't work. Because it takes about an hour to get through his presentation, almost an hour, by the time you answer all the questions and things that are going on. And I think it would be really good, maybe we could do that at the beginning of a joint meeting, and that way you kill two birds with one stone. So, the Tim's presentation to the CAC and the TAC at the same time. What's that?
Or it lasts 2 hours, it could go either
Well,
way.
that's true, but he has to come back and do it again for them anyway, so regardless, one way or the other.
Right. So, and I know you guys are swamped and you've done a great job of dual pulling us, so we can't take it anymore. But you know we're gonna do those joint meetings, I think any way we could try and get those somewhat regular. If we can find a time that works for the majority of people, so then we don't have this meeting where half of us made it, half of us didn't, those didn't show up, they don't know what happened. Just trying to get kind of a regular schedule so we can get that scoring done and have the most people there as possible without having to doodle pull it every week and say, all right, we're going to have a schedule 4 or 5, and if that sounds excessive, that's great, but then we know we have those on the calendar for those of us whose calendars fill up rather quickly. That way we can block out those times and do our best to be there. Any other comments? Any other future items? Motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Fastest one all day. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carried, we are adjourned.
Should try to set up at least 2 meetings.